the Creativity, Thinking, and Education podcast with your host, Patricia Rose Upsack.
And today we are very happy to be welcoming John Schaefer, who is the director and founder of the Children's Media Workshop, an artist, educator, community builder who uses innovative media experiences to create macro-educational systems. His expertise in designing large-scale initiatives is informed by his commitment to grassroots authenticity, which, John, I have to tell you, I love that sentence or that part of the bio, because grassroots authenticity is not something I've ever actually come across in somebody's bio before. One day he is working on major systems. The next he is in an inner city classroom giving cameras to kids while looking for a marker that has ink. He is the translator of concepts and experiences. John, say hello while I take a deep breath as I go on with your bio.
Okay, hello everyone. And actually, as I was listening to that, it did sound familiar.
He also has his documentary and art photographs of U.S. political campaigning have been requested for the Library of Congress Master Photographers Collection. He is the original Sundance documentary artist, featured at 3 film festivals, on numerous festival posters, and in a permanent installation at Sundance. He's the Polaroid artist in residence and used Polaroid experimental films and large-scale prints created at the MFA in Boston to document politics in America. He's the designer of the visual learning workshops, and which resulted in 2 White House invitations. He received the Nissan Hometown Hero Award, featured on Primetime Network television for youth empowerment through media experience and community activism. He's designed one of the first online courses and webinars, the Media Savvy Classroom, in conjunction with Columbia Teacher College. And John, we're going to move right into what is your hello and what's your most recent endeavor that I don't even want to start talking about until you do.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Patty. That was I was almost falling asleep, but I was actually here.
Sounds like you've been very busy, John.
Well, just hearing what my life has been like, it did tire me a little, and some of that stuff's true, and so it was interesting to listen to it. Really, my life is really about having been trained in college as a teacher, and then not being able to get a teaching job because of the way I taught. I went into my teacher training program, and the principal just let me go full speed ahead. The teacher was actually missing from the class, so they let me go full speed ahead and do whatever I wanted. And I was in a practically all black school in South Bend, Indiana. I was a Notre Dame student. Uh-huh. And as I started teaching, I just threw away all the textbooks and started using Bill Cosby records. Now Bill's in a bit of trouble as well. He should be, but using the vernacular of kids to teach adjectives and adverbs and parts of speech and pointing them out in popular culture. And so that's how we the kids did fantastic on their tests. And basically, because I didn't follow what the principal told me to do, his recommendation said I should never be allowed in the classroom. So, it was pretty. It was. I would say semi-devastating, except that I picked up the pieces and got into becoming a photographer and an artist, and fell into some really good things. Like I said, when we started Sundance, I was called on to do work there and become part of that Sundance family that moved from just being the Institute to being the film festival, and getting to work with a whole bunch of people. I've had people like Alan Alda and Morgan Freeman and all kinds of folks, Sigourney Weaver, all teaching workshops with us and working with kids, because I never actually put down the idea that I really wanted to be an educator. And so what happened was I mixed photography with education and started getting small grants and formed a nonprofit excuse me, I'm battling a little cold here. Formed a nonprofit that worked with kids and cameras, and found out quickly that the best way to work with kids and cameras was, at that time in the 80s, to use Polaroid film so that there'd be instant feedback, like any good learning situation.
Right.
And it very rapidly, I saw miracles taking place when we made a big translation. It was actually, I can still remember, I was sitting in a hogan down on a Navajo reservation looking at the kids' work with another fellow photographer named Bruce Hucko. And we were looking at the kids' work, and we were trying to get a grammar for what makes a good photograph so that we could explain to them what was a good photograph, what was a bad photograph. And somehow, it's a little unclear, since that was 30 years ago, exactly how that all came down. But basically, we came across the idea that there is a grammar to photography. Photography is a language. And we start out by showing kids, a picture of a tree, and they call it a tree, and we'd say, "This is not a tree. It's a piece of paper. It might have come from a tree." And so pretty soon they got that this was a language. You're translating what you're looking at. And then this language has a grammar, and the grammar we simplified into being, we'd ask kids to come up and we'd draw a square or a rectangle, and we'd ask them to mark the most important part with an X. And eventually some kid came up and put the X across the whole frame. And of course that became that was like bingo. That was the cut through everything else, and all of a sudden, doing that one little bit of teaching, kids became great photographers in 10 minutes. And you could actually, and it was we had a perfect rubric for judging, which was if something in there that you don't want, or if there's something missing, then you have not made a good photograph. We can't tell you what to make a photograph of, but as long as you're in control and everything in there you want in there and everything, which is the same as any other language, talking, writing. Right. That's what makes this so interesting, this interview, because, I can't edit anything out of this.
That's true.
This is those things where, so you have to be on your toes, which is fine, but so
you're
from
good on
that,
your toes, John. It's okay.
Well, yeah, I should get my tutu on. But that's another story. From there, we went basically to how could we went from the kids making great photographs to understanding the grammar of photography. Then we moved them into the grammar of two other really significant languages: reading and writing, which would be language arts in school, and math, which is language, both used to explain the world. And so we found incredible ways. I mean, younger kids could go out and make photographs that included triangles, rectangles, trapezoids. We could talk about parallel lines. We could talk about, areas of things, comparisons, ratios, all kinds of things in one photograph. Conversely, we had kids writing about their photographs, too. I mean, the kid could look at the photograph and write it. Well, one of the coolest things we did was Danny Elfman was up at Sundance one year, who was the founder of a group called Oingo Boingo, and he's got a couple of Academy Awards now for the music in the Batman films and some other films.
Oh, right. Okay.
Danny took the kids' Polaroids and put them on his piano and played them. So he took a Polaroid and made a 1-minute song out of it just by looking at it. So it was really high tides and green grass. It was really cool because we were finding all kinds of great ways to teach. And before I knew it, we had formed a network of teachers. We partnered with Polaroid. We made a deal with them that they give us free cameras, and we'd run around. I had about 12 people working for me at that time when it started to explode. We'd run around teaching these in-service workshops that were really fantastic, and because they were being taught photography, and then they would be taught how to use visuals in their classroom. So we really didn't call it photography workshops. We called it visual learning workshops. But a number of important things happened. One was that the teacher learned something during their hour in service. Now, that doesn't sound like a big deal, but I remember the people at Columbia Teachers College telling me that that they did a little study for us, and they said we actually were the best, teacher in service that they'd ever seen. Of course, then as an aside to me, they said, you have to understand that a teacher would want to die during an in-service workshop because the transition from life to death is not that great. So you're really not competing against anything particularly compelling, let's say. And so, but anyway, because of that, and because of the fact that we're giving teachers something, since they don't usually get anything, we were able to start building a great reputation. None of us worked for Polaroid. We got Polaroid cameras because we proved that the average teacher was using like 25 packs a year when they bought the camera because they found it so useful in their classrooms.
Right.
Whereas the average Polaroid camera user only used 1 pack during the life of the camera.
Huh.
So, and the reason for that is that, which shocked me, but the reason is that the pictures, if you don't know how to make a good photograph, you're holding up a picture that cost $1 in the 1980s, and it was bad. It was made to look bad, and it was expensive. In fact, by the end of Polaroid, they were using all our learning stuff on their boxes to try to change the public how to make good photographs.
How to take pictures.
Yeah. So what we did, which I think it pertains to what is the best story leading up to what we do today, was that we found a technology that was a heck of a lot of fun, and that was easily accessible, but that could be used and customized to teach just an array of subjects across the curriculum, depending upon the creativity of the teacher. And the subject itself, because it was a photograph, was relevant. Okay? That's the big thing that's the thing that what that project, which exploded on us, we had almost 1 million teachers at one point in this. And I was, like I said, I got invited to the White House a couple times, and I actually did a workshop with the first President Bush. We did a workshop together, Jodie Foster, President Bush and I did a workshop. It was like one of the first video conferencing workshops, and we had 30,000 teachers pushing the button of a camera at the same time and stuff. It was cool. It was a lot of fun. And the basics to it were very simple. It was a language that kids and adults use, which is visual language. Okay, so it was also relevant. You make a photograph. The reason I'm a photographer is because people assume it's real. Photography in general is based on real things. You're pointing a camera, and it's reality. Of course, we know you can doctor photographs, of course, with Photoshop. Right. But even back then, you could the angle of the photograph, the context of the photograph, all those things do tell different stories. So there's a lot of wiggle room here. But for sure, when a kid saw a photo of a tree, they didn't say it's a photo of a tree. They said it was a tree. Mm-hmm. Whereas if a kid saw a poem of a tree, they never said it was a tree.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
Even though a good poem of a tree captures the treeness of being a tree also. So the visual language, we started studying it more, and people that were working for me, there's a guy, Tim Gangwer, and you know Tim. Uh-huh. Tim went hog wild on the whole visual language stuff. He's written 5 books on it now. And he just went into really studying why it was so compelling, and it has to do with how much your eyes, how much of your brain is dedicated to forming images. Right. And even if you're blind, Stevie Wonder is still forming images. And so we were using something that's very important that in general in school is not used, which is visual learning.
Aha. That sounds amazing. Now, just so I know for sure, aren't you working on something really powerful right now?
Well, when we had 800,000, when we had gotten to that point of 800,000 plus teachers with our cameras, and they were getting, this is pre-internet, they were getting, very beginning of the internet, actually it looped into it a little bit, but they were given a quarterly newsletter that had all kinds of really cool curriculum. And at that point, with the big company, we were making more money for Polaroid than any other part of their company. And so it was a really cool partnership. It actually caused it to prematurely end because they eventually wanted us to be employees. And we didn't feel that we could go into classrooms and do the things we did and be employees, and that would be the right thing to do. So we got into loggerheads with that. And at the same time, I had actually seen digital photography, and I had lunch with two of the vice presidents of Polaroid right after I'd been in New York City and seen the first digital cameras in the early 90s, which totally displaced Polaroid. And told them about it, and they were both like, we retire. We're going to both be retired in 5 years, so it's not a big deal. And so I learned a lot about business then too. So not all businesses, but this business came crashing down because of that, and we really did have the answer to them. We became really their canary in the coal mine. You could look at us and see what we were doing and see why we were doing it and why it was successful, because we loved their product more than they did. When Polaroid was first founded, it was founded by a guy named Edwin Land, who's one of the great scientists of the 20th century, and he founded the Polaroid camera. Polaroid, he had already had the Polaroid company up, and it did all kinds of cool things with polarizing light and things like that, and he was very important in World War II and blah, blah, blah. But his daughter wanted to see photographs right away, and so he built the Polaroid camera, which is now housed at MIT, his whole collection of cameras and stuff. It's pretty cool. And anyway, it was, he had no longer had anything to do with the company. So the people that were running the company were no longer image people. They were salespeople. And so, that's why really, they were nice people, and they were nice for us to work with and so on, but they were not committed to image making. Okay, fast forward to today, which this interview is August 2015. You fast forward to today, and one thing we know for sure is that we didn't change the system. Okay, we reached about, I think the figure was 28% of all K-12 teachers with our Polaroid training.
That's huge. That's a big percentage.
Huge. And I'm sure lives have changed, and because I've seen lives change when I get into a classroom. Some of them even improved, But I hope all of them improved, actually. But so we didn't make any kind of systemic change. The system is worse now than it even was back then. School was irrelevant way back when. When I was in teacher training, and I was a basketball player. I knew a bunch of the basketball players, and there was a lot of Black Power stuff going on in the early 70s and things. And this one kid in our teacher training class stood up, not teacher training class, but the teacher ed classes, stood up and he talked about how irrelevant learning was for Black kids. And I told him to sit down, and I stood up and said it's irrelevant for white kids. It's like, any way you look at it, there's so much cognitive surplus being left on the table, and that's a term we've been using a lot lately, that we look at it as, if you could change the school system so the kids are actually involved in their own learning all day long, so if they became learning machines, we think you could change the world. That's our...
Well, the thing is that, in terms of my teaching experience, I found that most of my students, which is part of the reason that I got so involved in the whole idea about creativity, thinking, and education, is most of my students were very, very bright and very creative, and they absolutely refused to be put in a box, which was why they would end up being referred to Mrs. Upsack because a lot of them that were high school kids, a lot of them were football or basketball players, and the coaches wanted them to stay on their teams, but they were failing their classes because they wouldn't follow the rules, quote. And yet when I would sit down and start working with them, I would find that half the time, for example, they'd done their homework and they just wouldn't turn it in. And it wasn't they were being awful or mean. They just didn't want somebody judging particular parts of them when they knew that there was so much more and they wanted to do different things. I had one student who built a laser at home, but he would fail his math class because he didn't turn in his homework. I mean, so that all of that was always mind-boggling to me.
Well, and there are stories about Einstein that may be apocryphal, but would kind of along those same lines. He couldn't pass 8th grade because he wasn't doing the work they wanted him to do, and
exactly.
And so on. Yesterday I have a nephew who's a great. He worked for he's a really dedicated guy, and he worked for the EPA for a while. He didn't like the way that he felt like it was a cush job, but it wasn't the kind of thing that was really doing the mission. So he's a mission-driven person.
Uh-huh.
So he went back to school and got a degree to teach elementary school, and so he's been teaching elementary school for about a half dozen years, and I don't get to see him that much, about twice a year. He lives in New Mexico, and he's been, male elementary school teachers are rare, and but he's also a great teacher. So it was everybody, literally everybody wanted him to teach their kid. Mm-hmm. And they had, in 6 years, he was teacher of the year, 3 years or whatever. So he called me the other day and said, Uncle John, I quit teaching. I'm not going back. Because they brought a new principal in, and the new principal came in at the end of last year. There was a teacher meeting, from what I understand, and she was giving these district-wide mandates that on such and such a day, every class was going to be on this particular thing. And Adrian said, listen, my kids don't learn that way. My kids will learn, we'll cover all the stuff, but we'll cover it when the time is right and when it's embedded in something that makes sense to them. And his kids test great. His kids test great. I mean, they're disadvantaged kids mostly, but they test great. So it's not a question of that. And so it sort of subverted her power, from the way he put it, right in front of everyone else. And he said, maybe I should have been more politically correct about it and just gone and done it my own way. Right. But then she started telling him that he wasn't going to teach the same class. That she gave him the review as the worst teacher in the school, basically.
Oh no!
Now this is the guy that was best teacher of the school the year before. Okay.
Right.
And so this is not uncommon. I am dealing with I don't know if anybody but myself and a few other people in the world, you maybe, are dealing with looking at what's really going on in schools. And not just in one school, but a bunch of schools, and is working with those kids. So I'm looking at the kids and the teachers on a daily basis. That was the best part. It was written years ago, but that was the best part of my bio that you read, which is one day I will be sitting next to the Secretary of Education. But the next day, I've got Johnny falling out my window of my classroom. It literally happened. And so luckily we were on the first floor. I'm not a bad teacher. And so, but those are the kinds of kids I get, And,
well, see, I loved my job teaching, and I taught for 23 years, but I was there for the kids, and and everything else I kind of just maneuvered around to the best of my ability because I knew what they needed and I knew how to get it to them, and pretty soon, I have to admit, basically, even the administration, I was really lucky. They even just sort of left me alone. And one of my evaluations said, we don't really understand exactly what she does. All we know is that her students' test scores have risen dramatically. Her students are much better behaved. Her students are much happier. They're productive. They're graduating. And over the years, I have 3 students that have PhDs and several that have masters, and all of them, really, I would say 99% of them are productive human beings and much happier in the world. And I consider that a huge, sort of big stamp for me.
And it should be. That's why I'm talking to you.
I know.
Time is short right now, and I'm only really dealing with people that I think have something to offer for this, because right now, we failed miserably at changing the system, okay? Right. This time, we're not going to fail. We're just not going to fail. and it's gonna take quite an effort, but it's gonna be a lot of fun, and this transformation is going to take place fairly rapidly, given the things that are going on in the world with technology and the things that we have at our disposal. And so we're looking at, I'm leading into telling you what we're doing now, which I hope is going to form large-scale systemic change. Okay, so here it is.
All right.
So first of all, I've got a team of people. There are about 8 of us that are pretty close, talk to each other all the time, and 4 of us that are working on this full time right now, which means, in many cases, we just got a very significant grant from the state of Utah because they believe what we're doing could build an actual business, although it's not really our interest. Our interest is in getting our method of teaching being utilized in schools across the country. Okay.
Okay.
And
all right.
Actually, it was coming back from your Minnesota gig on creativity that we had our biggest breakthrough. It started during that whole weekend, and we were literally waiting for the plane to take off, and we realized because we're using a technology that uses mapping, interactive mapping as our first product, our first. It's kind of like the icebreaker that goes out there. It's like the nose of whatever it is that we're trying to get into the system. And this idea of interactive mapping is something we've been learning for the last 5 years since we were introduced to it. It's been compelling. We've been on a big learning curve ourselves. But it sort of was getting our attention more than it should have, when really what we're into is what we're calling idle learning, okay? And idle stands for you're interested in something, you do it, then you've learned it, and then you're engaged to have more interest and start that cycle all over again. Now, the formula we played with in the airplane, and we've been playing with now for 5 months, and it totally holds up. It totally holds up, and it describes exactly the opposite of what school is. School does not start with the I in idle. It starts with the L. And it decides what you are going to learn. Then it forces you to do. So it's really an LD. It's a learn, do, and whether you have interest in it is irrelevant to the school, unfortunately. I mean, they'd love you to have interest in it, but there's no methodology to make you interested. And 99% of the time that anybody forces me to do anything, it's going to have to be really compelling, or I'm not going to be.
Yeah, exactly. Me too.
And let alone engagement. Okay, so it became a very simple model for us. Frankly, it was given to us by a 4th grader. I was listening to 4th grade, and I asked, how do you guys learn best? And the kid put, well, if I'm interested in something, I'll do it. If I'm not interested, I don't. And then we literally built that model with a group of 4th graders one day.
Thank you for joining us here at the Creativity, Thinking, and Education podcast. John Schaefer is one of the most remarkable people, and he does truly show us how creativity, thinking, and education can be all wrapped up in one person. Please visit us at happyteachershappystudents.com, and if you find value in this podcast and the message we are trying to spread, then please please click the subscribe button and give my show a review. I am so excited to be able to share this timeless awareness of so many guests. Next week, we will be talking to the absolutely remarkable Jacob Lieberman, and I can't wait to hear what he has to say. Thank you, and have a wonderful week.